Before I get into this video, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the wildfires that are currently happening in Northern Ontario. What many people don't know is that these wildfires are disproportionately impacting Indigenous communities. A lot of First Nations communities are not getting evacuation notices, so they have to decide on their own when to abandon their homes, and they're not receiving proper emergency aid after evacuation. Some of the most viral images from these wildfires are from the Collins First Nations Reserve that has completely burnt to the ground. So once the fires are put out, they don't have their home to return to. Now, just on a level of watching this happen to other human beings, it breaks my heart. But as an Indigenous person, this hits very hard because that's basically the entire history of Indigenous people in North America. Stories being pushed to the side in favor of jokes about wildfire smoke coming over the border. Underfunding, underrepresentation, just being forgotten after these tragedies and having to rely on each other rather than aid that they should be getting like everybody else. So in the comments under this video, and probably a post that I make after this video, I'm going to list some resources and links that you can go to if you want to donate or find other ways to help out, maybe if you are in Canada. I personally am going to be making a donation to True North Aid. They're an organization that focuses on providing aid to some of the Indigenous communities all around Canada. At least whatever I am able to give goes somewhere where it can be of some help. Okay, after that, it feels a little bit weird just jumping into the video, but I have been wanting to get this out. It is strangely topical for what I just talked about. Today, I'm going to be telling you some folklore and stories from the Haudenosaunee people, also known as the Iroquois or Iroquois up in Canada, or the Six Nations, which are the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Tuscarora. I'm Mohawk, my dad's Mohawk, my grandmother's Mohawk. We unfortunately don't have much connection to our blood-related family from there because she was adopted, but we know that we are from Six Nations. But despite not having a lot of opportunity to directly connect with our own community, throughout my life, me and my Nana have made sure in whatever little ways we can possible to participate in our culture and show appreciation and love. She used to do beadwork all of the time. My Uncle Kenny also does beadwork all the time. And in high school, in fact, I took Tuscarora as a second language. So it's not my language, but I thought it was better to know a language that's at least a sister language to Mohawk. Trinity Giatha disna ii gani gehaka. Riet gani gehaka disna resetieth guarina. Nuskis garura gaya dakra waknana. Nuatni adgutnashani uke Haudenosaunee. So that was my personal introduction, basically saying I'm called Trinity. My father is Mohawk, and our clan is the Wolf Clan. I lived near the Tuscarora Reservation, and that we are called the Agutnashani or the Haudenosaunee. I'm actually not sure what Agutnashani translates to, but I know Haudenosaunee is people of the Longhouse because that's what we used to live in. So I have wanted to make a video like this forever because Indigenous horror, even if it's not credited, so much horror, even online horror, is based off of Indigenous legends, such as the Skinwalker or the Wendigo, even though it's often a pale imitation of what the original legend is supposed to be. But things like the Knot Deer and the Flesh Pedestrian and all of that stuff that you find in creepypastas and stuff, that is obviously based on the Skinwalker and stuff like that. Even the most famous cryptid of all, Sasquatch, is based on the Saskets of the Northwestern Indigenous peoples. I'm sorry, I don't know all of the different names. If I could, I would credit them all by name. Maybe I'll do a pop-up on the screen. But my point is, horror culture here in North America especially is tied into Indigenous legend, whether we're credited or not. But because I am not personally connected to where I come from, I never really had a lot of those legends. I would hear things from other Indigenous people, but because I didn't have the full story or something, it didn't seem worth making a video about something I don't have the full story to. But then, when I was in Barnes & Noble, I picked up this book, which is titled Iroquois Supernatural. talking animals, and medicine people. Now, when I'm shopping for books, if I see something that is Indigenous legends or Native American stories and stuff like that, if it's not written by an Indigenous person or an Indigenous person didn't collaborate on it, I don't really want to buy it because, again, a lot of context can get lost if you are not part of the culture that's telling the story. This book was written by Michael Bastine and Mason Winfield. Michael Bastine, he is an Algonquin healer and elder, Algonquin being the very large group of different Indigenous nations that are neighbors to the Haudenosaunee. We didn't always get along, apparently. And he was also the student of a famous Tuscarora medicine man and a Tuscarora healer. So this book has a collection of all sorts of different stories. Some of them have specific attributions to one of the 6 nations. Like the first one I'm going to tell is from the Onondaga Nation, while other ones I think have just been passed around between the nations because we are all so close and we share clans. It could have just been there were different versions of the story just depending on who you're talking to. So the first story I'm going to tell you, like I said, is from the Onondaga people, and it is titled in the book, The Midnight Service. So the story goes that there were 3 siblings who were orphaned at a very young age. So they were taken in by their mother's cousins and raised in their village near what is modern-day Syracuse. They grew up, they were very happy, loved, and cared for, but when they became teenagers, the eldest brother fell extremely sick to the point where it was expected that he was going to die. Now, nobody really had an answer to what had happened to him, but there were rumors around the village. People thought he may have been cursed. And there was even a specific old woman in the village that people said they believed was a witch. Some people claimed to have seen her breathing fire at night or just doing other unnatural things that indicated witchcraft. And the youngest brother believed this. He had always gotten bad vibes from this old woman. So he wanted to get to the bottom of it and help his brother. So one day he approached her while she was walking in the woods, and he said, "I want to be a witch." And she kind of gave him a look like, "Really? You're coming to me about this?" And she said, "You better be serious about what you're talking about." He said, "Yes, I am serious about it." And she looked him up and down. And while she was looking at him, one of her eyes rolled back into her head, and she looked away very quickly, but the boy had already seen it. She wiped her nose and she turned back to him and said, "Fine, if you want to be a witch, you go home and you point your finger at your sister, and she's going to fall ill and she will die within the week. But if you disobey me, you better point your finger at yourself because it'll be better than what I do to you." The boy agreed, saying that if that's what it took to become a witch like her, then he would do it, and he started walking home. He didn't initially believe that anything was going to happen if he pointed at his sister, but he also didn't want to risk it, so he decided to test this on a nearby tree. He pointed at it, and suddenly a squirrel fell dead from the branches. And I'm sure he was very happy that he had tested it beforehand. So he ran home and he told his sister all about it. And they devised a plan that she was going to pretend that she was sick. So the witch believed that he had done it. The next day, everybody hears that she's very, very ill, and the witch kind of nods her head and she's like, "Okay." A few nights later, she goes into the woods and the boy follows her. He follows behind her for a while until suddenly she comes up behind him, grabbing him, which startled him, especially because he had just been following her. So how did she get behind him? She laughed and said, "Scared you, didn't I?" But he wanted to pretend to be brave and just acted very nonchalantly. They walked for a while, and then suddenly she took off running straight at a large tree. And he thought that she was going to headbutt this thing like a ram, but instead she jumped and grabbed onto the tree trunk with her hands and feet. And then when she turned back at him, she had the fiery eyes and sharp teeth of a panther. He could literally see the fur that had sprouted all over her. He could see the muscles beneath the fur moving. Her hands and feet had grown claws, and she snarled at him. And again, not wanting to seem like he was scared of her, he stood there and just watched. Eventually, she came down and she kind of nudged him, like, "Got you again, didn't I?" And he was like, "No, but I want that power." And she laughed, and they continued into the woods until they came upon a clearing. When they came into this clearing, he saw that there was a cook fire in the middle, and that there were a lot of people gathered out there, mostly older men and women. He recognized some from his own community, but then there were others that he didn't recognize that must have come from other nearby villages. And in his head, he was like, maybe I'm not so good at telling who witches are because all of these people that I know are in on it. And then again, when he noticed that it was mostly older people, he thought maybe this is why it was kind of easy for me to infiltrate this group, because they're looking for young men specifically. Now, over the fire, there was a bundle of snakes curled up on a spit that were dripping blood and venom and other fluids into a little kettle. Eventually, when the cup filled up enough, people began passing it around, taking a drink of it. The younger brother took the cup and pretended to take a drink, but then passed it on, hoping that nobody noticed, and people began changing. Some of them started to just sound a little different, maybe a little more guttural like a boar, or a little high-pitched like a deer. He saw that some were jumping and running faster than they should have been able to, and he could see in the shadows beyond the reach of the fire that people were transforming into different animals, or at least growing traits from these animals. There were people with cat ears and antlers and hooves and fur, and he was just standing there watching in fascination, not realizing that some people were looking at him and wondering why he had not turned into anything. So a few people approached him and asked why he hadn't turned. He said, I don't know. This is my first time being here. I don't know how to turn into an animal. They asked him what he wanted to be, and he said a screech owl. So they said, okay, we have just the thing. And these people, who were also mid-transformation into various sorts of animals, brought over a hat for him made from the head of a screech owl. They said, when you put this on, you are going to become an owl. You are going to look through the eyes and you are going to see like an owl. But first, you need to practice, or else there's a good chance you may fly away and we'll lose our hat forever, or you'll just end up killing yourself. And he asked them, how do I act like a screech owl? And he says to them, how do I practice being an owl? They said, you pretend first. Pretend to preen your feathers. Pretend to move your head like an owl. He did all of this, and he felt kind of silly, but he took his nose and he began preening under his arms like he had feathers, like he had seen owls do before, and tried moving his head as far as it could go. And people were laughing at him, but they were also encouraging him. Finally, he decided to put on the hat, and when he put it on, the eye sockets of the owl head lined up perfectly with his eyes, but his sight had changed. He began flapping his arms and realized that they had become wings. Now, the people all around him, they were cheering and hooting and howling with excitement as he started flying higher and higher. But soon he began flying so high that he realized if he wasn't careful, he was going to lose his way completely. So he decided to turn around and go find his village, because as long as he was able to find his village, he would know where he was. Now, on his way there, anytime there was a hare or a mouse or anything else in the grass, he had to fight the instincts that overtook him to dive and catch it. Eventually, he returned to his village and decided to fly through the smoke hole in the top of his family's longhouse. But unfortunately, he kind of crash landed. The owl hat fell off of him and fell to the ground below, and he was hanging from the smoke hole. The dogs in the longhouse started barking, and his cousins got up and grabbed their war clubs, and they were getting ready to beat him, thinking that he was an intruder. But thankfully, his sister saw him and realized it was him, and they helped him down. Now, when he got to the ground, he realized that the owl hat had been destroyed, and also that the dogs had kind of torn apart whatever was left of it. So he couldn't use that anymore. He told all of his cousins about what he had witnessed and all of the witches that were in their very village, as well as from other villages. The next day, he told some of the younger men in the village, who didn't take a lot of convincing because they had always had a feeling that, especially that old lady, but some other people in the village, something was not right about them. They took it to the chief, and they gathered all of the greatest warriors from the village and decided to go out that night to find the witches. The younger brother led them to the clearing where he had been the previous night, and they crept up behind the circle of witches. Now, some of the older witches that were there, who were completely obscured in various types of animal skins and masks and such, were talking to the rest of the witches about how they all had not done nearly enough evil deeds to go to the evil one, who was their patron, the evil spirit, when they died. They said that if we were all to die right now, we would go to the great spirit, the good spirit. So tonight, when we go back to our villages, each of us must curse and murder at least one person each, starting with the boy that stole the owl hat. And I'm sure feeling very badass, the younger brother stepped forward and he was like, "Who, me?" They were all about to attack him when all of the warriors jumped into place. All of them had crouched behind an individual witch, and they were all struck down dead. And the younger brother, as well as the rest of the men, went back to the village as heroes, having saved many, many lives that night. And thankfully, the older brother, who I guess the old witch had put a curse on, recovered. When I read that story, I was so excited because it's like a combination of so many different cultures. It sounds like a story right out of like the era of the Salem witch trials and like covens of witches and stuff like that. And it also reminds me a lot of the skinwalker of Navajo legend, because nowadays a lot of people see the skinwalker as just this monster that's out wandering the woods, when really it is a medicine man who decided to use his gifts for evil. And the legend says they often have to do a lot of evil acts in order to gain access to the powers that they have to either gain the abilities of animals or to fully shift into animals. Now, the next story I'm going to tell you about is also very cool because it's about vampires. You normally think like, okay, that is like an old school kind of monster that originated in like Eastern Europe and was brought over. And while the name vampire is definitely not ours, we also had stories about people who died and came back and were blood drinkers. The story goes that an old man lived in a cabin all on his own. When he was nearing the end of his days, he could feel that he wasn't going to be around much longer. So he instructed the people around him to put him in a wood bark coffin and to put him in the back room of the cabin. And the cabin would be available to any travelers on the road, but under no circumstances should any women or children ever stay in the cabin because it would be too dangerous. The old man eventually died, and those around him honored his wishes and put his body in the back room, which I guess was customary at the time. Time passed, and eventually a small family that was traveling nearby decided to stop in the cabin for the night. Now, the family was a husband, a wife, and their infant daughter. The husband went to the back room to take a nap, while the wife, with the daughter slung onto her, began preparing dinner. And sometime while she was doing this, she began hearing the sickening crunch of bones breaking and then a slurping sound. And she instantly knew that her husband was dead and that her and her baby were next. So, trying to remain calm and thinking on her feet, she called out to her husband, "Honey, I'm going out to the river to get water for the broth for our stew. I'll be right back. Don't worry." And as calmly as she could, she walked out of the cabin. But once she was far enough away, she began sprinting away. Now, this might have given her a little bit of time to put some distance between them, but not long after, she heard this hellish screeching coming from the direction of the cabin, and then footsteps pursuing her. She kept running, but she heard these footsteps closing in, so she decided to take off her scarf and throw it behind her. And for a few seconds, she didn't hear anything, and then she heard the ripping of the fabric and another scream. So she began pulling off articles of her clothing and throwing them behind her, hoping to stall the vampire enough for her to find help. As she ran, eventually she came across a village that was walled off, and she began letting out a traditional distress cry, hoping that somebody would hear her. But she did not have a lot of faith that that would happen. Though luckily, some women were still outside of the village and they heard this distress call and also picked it up, which alerted men in the village to open up the gates and see what was happening. She fell to her knees outside of the gate, not thinking that she had been fast enough. But thankfully, the men were able to pick her up and bring her inside, and the vampire, who was very close by and able to see this, knew that he would not be able to take on all of these warriors. So he retreated. When the woman was calmed down enough and it was confirmed that she was okay, that the baby was okay, she told her story to them. So the next day, all of the the best warriors in the village went out to the cabin. Hearing this, all of the best warriors the next day picked up their weapons and went out to this cabin. When they went inside the back room, they saw the body of the husband, who looked pretty peaceful in his death, but then they saw a huge hole in his side and he was drained of blood. They opened up the coffin that was in the room and they saw what they called a very content-looking corpse with blood on his mouth. They took their war clubs and they beat the vampire to a pulp, and then they set the cabin on fire. However, as they were watching the cabin burn, they saw a jackrabbit escaping through the logs of the fire and run away into the forest. Now, some believe that that jackrabbit was just a rabbit, while others believe that the vampire had been able to transform in it in order to escape. Regardless, though, thankfully, the vampire was never seen again. Now, this third story I'm going to tell you about is about a creature called a changeling. Now, this is different than the changeling of Celtic folklore, where fairies will kidnap a healthy human baby and leave a changeling in their place, which is like a fairy baby with all sorts of issues and is a terror to the parents that have to raise it. Changelings in the Haudenosaunee context are animals that have human features or vice versa. They may be considered shapeshifters, such as a human choosing to take on the form of an animal, but it's never quite right. Because it's not a natural creature, it may still have the eyes of a human, or it may lack a tail, which is a very well-known indicator that I'm sure many people have heard of something not being a real creature. Now, this story is fairly short, but this is apparently somebody's actual account. It's not just a folk tale that goes around. Apparently, a council meeting was happening on a reservation north of Buffalo. It is not specified what reservation, but apparently a woman in this council meeting got very uppity and she rubbed a lot of people the wrong way with whatever she had been saying. After the council meeting, she went home and went about her business, and later in the day, she was hanging her laundry on a clothesline when she saw a dog in the distance. It was a very big black dog, and it wasn't facing her, so she saw its profile view. But as she looked at it, she could tell something was not quite right about it, especially in the face as she looked at its profile. It had a very flat-looking face, but not in the way that like a bulldog or a pug might have a flattened face. It just wasn't natural, and the hair started to raise on the back of her neck. And that's when the thing turned to look at her. And she described the face as that of a Native American man looking back at her. Not that it was a dog with like eyes like a person or with features that weren't quite right. It was a human face, and then you could see like its drooping ears and the rest of the dog. And she screamed, and it scared the ever-loving shit out of her. And she ran into her house, she drew the blinds, and she stayed extremely quiet. She had heard about things like this before. These creatures could be sent as curses, and they had been known to follow people and terrorize them for their entire lives. The next day came, and she didn't come out of the house until noon because she was terrified that the thing would still be out there waiting for her. But thankfully, it was gone. And when she went to her neighbors to ask, like, hey, have you seen anything like this? She was hoping that they would kind of say nothing was out of the ordinary, so maybe she could pretend it never happened. But they said they hadn't seen anything, but they heard this awful, awful inhuman screaming all throughout the night. She knew that it was likely from that creature. Now, when she talked to some of the elders, apparently when they were talking to her about it, it seemed like they were holding some information back. So the implication there is kind of one of the people that she pissed off during that council meeting may have either sent it to scare her and kind of get back at her or teach her a lesson, or maybe it was meant for someone completely different and she had just happened to witness it. And for this last story, I'm going to just read it right out of the book for you. I was so excited to see it because this is the only one that I've come across so far while reading this book that I have personally heard of. So my Tuscarora teacher has told me about this legend, and like even classmates that I had in middle school and high school said that they saw it. So I was really excited to see it. So the creature, at least as it's referred to in the book, is called High Hat. Quote, Many Native Americans testify without hesitation that there is some large humanoid critter on the prowl in our wooded regions. Most of us have heard of the giant ape-like being, variously named Bigfoot, skunk ape, or Sasquatch, that has been reported all over the United States. While its SAT scores may not get it into Duke, to the Iroquois it is no simple brute. To them, it is a very old, august being with the wisdom of the woods within it. Its power makes it capable of being dangerous. Iroquois country has a surprising number of sightings, and a few beings in Iroquois folklore might be the same thing. The last of the stone giants fled to the Allegheny Hills, and there may have been some connection to High Hat, a bogey of the same region memorialized in the tales of Seneca storyteller Duane Bowen. High Hat is a giant bestial humanoid fond of the taste of human children. We seldom hear of him far from his swampy haunts. His oddest feature is a stovepipe hat that reminds people of Uncle Sam, Abe Lincoln, or the archetypal image of a white undertaker. Tall, craggy, and lanky. Not only Native Americans see him, white construction workers spotted him at dawn and twilight during the construction of the Kinzua Dam, usually at the edge of bodies of water. Abe Lincoln, they nicknamed him because of the hat. We wonder how old he is. This man-animal morph makes us think of other shape-shifting beings, including witches, shamans, and even the Christian devil. Around the year 2000, reports started surfacing from the Tuscarora Reservation about some big, speedy beastie they called the Tall Man. It played high-speed hide-and-seek with reservation kids on ATVs, which calls for some pretty slick running. It also takes a lot to spook the Tuscarora. There's definitely something out there that can kill us, says Michael Bastien. If you decide to take a shot at one of those, you better be sure it's a good one. End quote. And I loved hearing about that. And there were so many other things that I saw in this book that I would love to make videos about, because there are so many similarities to other cryptids, like not even old school cryptids. Like there's a thing in here called the Legs, which sounds just like the Fresno Nightcrawlers from California. And those are thought to be aliens. So I want to know what the connection would be there. And there's so many other stories. There's the masks of the False Face Society, and I would love to make so many videos on it, all just off of this book. But I'm going to cut it here for today. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and click that notification bell so you'll be notified anytime I upload. If you are an Indigenous person and you feel comfortable sharing some of your stories, whether you are from the Six Nations or you are from a completely different nation, if you're comfortable, leave them down below, because I love learning about Indigenous folklore. It is just so unique compared to all of the other stuff out there, and it holds a really special place in my heart. And like I said earlier, in the description below and in a community post, I'm going to be leaving some links so you can see all types of different ways that you can help Indigenous communities that are being affected by the wildfires in Northern Ontario. In that community post, I'll probably post like a picture showing that I actually made a donation, so you guys can tell like I'm actually serious about this, and it would be really cool if you could also make a donation. Now, instead of pulling my comment of the day from my last video, which was about the Roswell incident, thank you, I really appreciated that comment, but I want to read the two that were left on the post about the wildfires that I made the other day. And one of them is the same person. That person is Samiam_3. Thank you so much for your comment. He says, "Thank you for spreading the word. I haven't heard much from the media about the fires. It is truly a devastating horror story. So when you can send the links, I will support by donating as much as I can." Thank you so much for that. It warms my heart that even though we're a small community, like anything helps. And I'm glad that I could be here like spreading the word about this stuff and getting it to people who might not have otherwise known what was happening, who can then contribute and help families that wouldn't have gotten that help otherwise. And the second comment that was left on the post was from @CryptidCannibal. "It's crazy up here right now. I'm from Oneida Nation of the Thames." I looked up what that word is. It's an Oneida word. I do not know how to pronounce it. I don't want to butcher it. I can barely remember how to speak Tusk, but it means like good day, have a good day, that kind of stuff. So, and to that comment, I want to first say Nyawet for leaving the comment, and I also want to say that I hope that you and all of your loved ones and your community are safe during these fires, that if you have to evacuate, that you get the aid that you need. But thank you also so much for watching. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was already very close to my heart just because of the topic, but with everything going on, it makes it even more important to me. So thank you for watching, especially since this isn't something completely like what I normally do. Next video should be out in just a few days. It is my Shark Week video, so hopefully you guys are looking forward to that. But thank you all so much for watching. I love you, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.